maybe we can start now. Then people can join along the way.
Good. I have a slow kind of introduction anyhow, so
it's okay. It's better to start. This is being recorded anyway, so it'll be a good chance for people to watch it later if it's fine for them. And yeah, I would like to start again and say hello to everybody who's joining now, who's going to be joining later. Today we're going to talk about research papers and importance of research papers and the importance of criticality when we look at research papers. And our guest today is Professor Mr. Gavin Jell from UCL. He's is the Associate Professor and Senior Lecturer in Nanotechnology and Regenerative Medicine in University College London. And he's had over 60 published papers on international journals regarding regenerative medicine. I just wanted to quickly and briefly talk about our center. İLM-LEARN International Education Center was established in 2015 in the UK, primarily focusing on A-levels, online A-levels classes and English language courses. But over the time, we extended, and now we have various courses from teacher trainings to other language courses and to preparation courses for schools and universities. And we also do webinars and seminars. But right now, for the pandemic, we're only doing webinars. I'm Leyla Shahbazova. I'm consultant in İLM-LEARN Education Center, and today I will be hosting this webinar with our guest speaker. This is a very interesting field, and to many people, I think it's especially nanotechnology. It's such a specific area of medicine where I myself, for example, I think of it as a very complex field of science, and what you do in your field, and it's also very specific when you work with regenerative medicine. And especially after this pandemic, lots of information out there on the internet, and it's mostly about these viruses and this field of science where it's easy to create wrong information and spread it. And not many people would read really in-depth published papers, but which is really important to actually understand the science behind whatever is coming out. You know, a lot of people go for the headlines, they go for these small, short articles. But the important part of this is all the hard work and all this research and then the evidence and the experiments that come with it, and that that make up these stories. And I would like to ask my first question regarding this. How do you what is nanotechnology and what is regenerative medicine, and what do you do, and what is the role of these in these science and research papers?
Thank you very much, Leyla, for that introduction. As there's some really important points you've just raised. In terms of, you would think that in the age of technology with the internet, even in my lifetime, we've seen far more information available. And I think initially we all thought this was going to be brilliant for sharing information, that people would become more knowledgeable, be able to access primary resources of information, read primary articles. But what's happened isn't the case. There's never been more conspiracy theories. There's never been more spread of misinformation, disinformation, and this is kind of like the main bit of my talk is like, well, how do we determine what's good science? Where should we look for this good science? And how do we make that decision? But yeah, in terms of my research, I have some slides about this, but I'm happy just to talk about it if you prefer. So I'm kind of my kind of research area as a whole is involved in how materials interact with biological environments. And that could be large materials like implants, orthopedic implants, breast implants, but also small, tiny materials like nanoparticles. And in terms of what kind of like this offers to medicine, then I'm interested in how can we improve implants so that they last longer, have less failure, and also can do more, so have increased functionality. Can they cause Can they cause our tissues to regenerate? And then in terms of nanoparticles, and one of my students, Medina, is here, who is a third-year PhD student now. Her research is really interested in understanding how we can get nanoparticles to where they're needed to deliver drugs. So improving our understanding of nanoparticle biological interactions so that we can get nanoparticles to where they're needed.
Okay. And what else? To me, for example, this is, as I said, it's a field of science where it's. I think I have to work quite hard to get into, understanding it. And it's what. How can we see this in research papers? And for example, someone like me or someone who's not familiar with this field of science, what can I see in research papers, and what can we say about this?
So maybe it's good to give an example of kind of exciting areas like stem cell research, which we're involved with, or growing whole organs, where anything where we can see that it's going to improve our well-being, treat disease, make us live longer, increase our well-being, obviously has a large amount of interest in the public, but also means that there's lots of hope. And it also means that some scientists might want to promote their work when maybe, I want to say they shouldn't, but maybe they make it sound better than it is.
Exactly, especially like when things like pandemics or epidemics, when they're especially politicized, for example, when they're used for certain motives, and there's apart from actually benefiting people, population at large. And what have you seen in your field that's been like very misleading? What is one of the most misleading things you've seen in your field on newspapers or research papers?
So one of my areas of research is I'm interested in making tissues, right? So growing tissues or having materials that can create new tissues. So enhanced wound healing, can grow bone, maybe even growing cartilage. I've been involved slightly with the area of research which is growing whole organs. So attempting to grow whole organs for patients who have failed organs. Now, from an academic point of view, it's quite interesting. From a practical reality, it's nowhere near being translatable. And there's lots of different challenges in there. But people have been talking about growing whole organs or creating tissues for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
There's I have some slides to show this, but if you trace it back, every 5 years there's reports in the media, often saying that in the next five years we'll be able to do this. In the next 5 years we'll be able to do this. And there's a real danger in this because it means that there's unscrupulous people that might benefit. We see these stem cell research centers, which people will pay a lot of money to get some stem cells implanted for their loved ones, their daughter, because of some rare disease, when there's absolutely no evidence that these stem cells are going to do anything, or possibly aren't even stem cells that they're using to implant. And there's also, I think in terms of the public understanding of science and trust in science, if we keep saying that we're going to have stem cell cures or whole organs in the next 5 years, and it doesn't come, eventually people are going to stop trusting science.
Yeah, and it's such a it's giving wrong hope and it's it's a false hope to people, especially when, as you said, when they need a transplant so much. And
yeah, that's right. I think, you know, there's also the danger in terms of funding. So when people can say they can do things which maybe we're not ready for, so creating whole organs, then there's the expectation in the funding bodies, the charities or other people, private individuals that invest in science, that will be willing to give money to the end product. They expect it to be delivered, as opposed to maybe doing more fundamental research.
yeah.
My students, Medina's research is quite interested in this. So nanoparticle drug delivery. So if you had 100 particles at the moment, and you put a label on each of those particles to maybe it's anti-tumor particle label on it. So when we put it in the body, what we're hoping for is this nanoparticle will attach to the tumor cell, and therefore we can release the drug at higher concentrations where it is, or maybe want to image it using that nanoparticle. If you had 100 nanoparticles that you put in with these labels, then 0.7% of them would get to the tumor. So it's a long way from being a reality at the moment. But people are expecting to have this tumor targeting success, which is not there. And that means that maybe funding bodies would be more willing to invest in the translational research, the stuff that's going to make a difference to the patients, as opposed to investing in fundamental research. I'll give you another example if I can.
Yeah, of course.
There was research a few years ago now by Professor Reisman in UCL, which showed that they used stem cells to implant into a spinal cord of someone who was paralyzed, and this person gained some functionality. It's a study that was performed in Poland. Now, at the same time, well, this went everywhere. It went worldwide. There was news articles everywhere, interviews. Something like £5 million in donations were given. Don't quote me on that. I don't know how much. A lot of money was invested in this research. But at the same time, in the same year, there were multiple studies that were controlled clinical trials that showed the effects of stem cells in patients using not just one-off study like this case, but lots of studies. But the media latched onto this one case as opposed to looking at the controlled clinical trials.
It is. You know, it reminds me of. I was reading this one article where it said, you know, it was talking about a certain drug, and I'm thinking in my head, because I'm trying to think critically, and I'm thinking, but they don't talk about side effects. They don't talk about how the liver gets rid of some of them, and they don't talk about this type of stuff. And it just felt quite a bit like an advertisement, basically. And they were just not giving the name. They were just talking about this molecules in it, this patented the ingredients in it. And I just felt like, oh, it's just another advertisement. And I'm guessing it's the same in this, you know, transplant field where, and I myself find this transplant industry, I mean, this whole finding organs, and it's quite dangerous actually when you talk about legal side of things as well, and it's quite dangerous. So any wrong information can lead to a lot of wrongdoings actually, I think, in society.
Yeah, I think this is yeah, I think there's a couple of sites now which allow you to look at the number of paper retractions, which is when you submit a paper and they found that there's been fraud committed or mistakes in the paper, then that paper can be retracted. And the number of paper retractions are increasing exponentially. I think at least we're being tracking them now. I think there is an argument that maybe there should be more that are retracted as well. That we're not catching all the journals that should be retracted. But I think the reasons why people are willing, academics are sometimes willing to commit fraud in there, or make data up, or have incomplete studies, or like you're saying, oversell their studies, is interesting. And it's probably to do with the pressure that's on academics or researchers to publish, and that might be the cause of the number of fake articles that are produced.
Yeah, also like some scientists could get paid by the companies, these large companies, to prior to releasing their products, and just say, oh, release this article. So when we release our product, people already have this pre-programmed idea. Oh, it was actually healthy. It was actually the scientists recently published this were healthy, and it quite reminded me of I'm not sure if you remember beginning of the pandemic, because there was this shortage of face masks suddenly. And then they released several articles I've seen talking about, oh, actually wearing mask can trap all the microbes and bacteria in here, so you're more prone to catching it. So people don't buy as much as it was hyped up to be. And so once they started mass producing more face masks, and then they said, oh no, you have to wear double mask actually. So it was quite this trend, this pattern that I witnessed. And it just reminds me of these, it's the same issue.
Yeah, I think the pandemic is really interesting, and there's been a number of published research. I mean, Donald Trump has been a big fan of chloroquine, the malaria drug that was using, which has shown limited kind of evidence of success whatsoever. The face masks are interesting because I think, like there were stories about it would be a benefit, it wouldn't be a benefit. I mean, it's an airborne transmitted disease, so of course any barrier is going to help.
Exactly.
Saying about the efficacy of the level of help, well, that's a different question, isn't it? So
Yeah.
If you have different face masks, they're going to offer you different protection levels. But I think it is difficult because if you're looking at this from a general public point of view, there's so much information there and conflicting information that you're not sure what to believe. I suppose vaccines now, because of COVID vaccinations, so we can see that there's a lot of people that don't want to have vaccines or are worried about having the vaccines. And this isn't a new phenomenon, of course. In fact, the Andrew Wakefield, and I'm not sure if you heard of him, but Andrew Wakefield was the person who said that the MMR vaccine, the mumps, rubella, and measles vaccine, could cause autism. Now, that was on a very small number of cohorts of patients. The results were disputed. There was fraud that was found in the collection of those results. The paper was retracted. Andrew Wakefield lost his job, but people still cite that paper to support their stance against the danger of using vaccinations. And
it's still in the minds of millions. Oh, yeah. It's this large damage that is caused.
Yeah, and in terms of the vaccines, the MMR, now, like, since that paper's come out, there's been real damage. Number of children that have died, causing brain damage from measles in the UK. So I'm not sure the numbers, but a large increase since that paper's been published and the anti-vaccine movement has begun. And the majority of the people in the UK, at least, that are kind of worried about vaccines, they're not the uneducated. They're middle-class people that have read these articles and are worried about it, as opposed to being, I don't know, uneducated people. They're the educated people. And the question is that if we can't convince these people to have the vaccine, then
what about the rest?
What about the rest of them? Yeah.
Professor, I have, sorry, I have to disrupt you here. Sure. We have a question, and after this question, we can move on to your slides if it's fine for you. And the question is by Ilaha, and she's asking, I'm just going to read the full question, full text. We sometimes need to research historical background of the research question because we need to do to create a photo for readers, and that is why researching the history of the problem is crucial. But don't you think that this can also lead to readers being exhausted because people now prefer to read short research paper? My question is that how we can keep balance for providing background of the research problem or the question. Thanks.
That's a good question. I mean, we can't be an expert in everything. I mean, it's simple as that. We can't be. What we can do is, when we're being critical about things that are published, is to look at the primary source, not the media outlet story, but actually look at the primary source. We can look at if they've got quantitative data, so rather than just pictures or images. We can look at the quality of the journal, like the peer review process that it's been through or not, and that's from any field. Now, if you asked me to read something on mathematical modelling, I wouldn't have a clue, but I would still maybe look at the authors, look at their reputation, and look to see if there's quantitative data in there or not.
Exactly, and I think it all comes down to schools, really, education system, and the promoting, encouraging people to go for a critical approach, always. And this is something I see on a daily basis with people younger than me, people older than me, and I've seen it, I've read it, this person says it, but this critical approach lacks in every conversation. And that's something I think it all comes down to education system and having actually teachers that encouraged us. And I'm sure you encourage your students always to have a critical approach to anything, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a balance of this. You could argue that conspiracy theories, they're being critical. They don't believe the doctrine, the truth that's there. If climate deniers or climate change deniers, they're out there, but they feel that they're being critical on the published research. So I think it's about the weight of evidence. So my wife tells me that I'm always too critical about everything, but I think whenever you read a paper, you've got to be convinced. Exactly. I want to look at the evidence to see if this is convincing. Am I convinced?
Exactly, and it's something I always tell people too. Just because you don't see it happening right now, it is happening gradually. Because compare 5 days ago, compare 6 years ago, for example, and this is this pattern, And Professor, thank you for answering the question. We can move on to your slides if it's
okay.
fine.
I was just going to say one more thing, if that's all right.
Of course,
the other thing, I guess, to answer this question is about you have to, when you're teaching, I think, accept in science the uncertainty, in that there isn't a paper that's been published that's perfect. There's always going to be flaws in any kind of publish. It's whether the arguments are strong enough. It's a bit like a detective for a crime. They have to build the evidence to say, is it convincing enough? And there's never going to be complete certainty, and we have to accept that uncertainty, but take the weight of evidence. Okay, I'm going to share my slides. Please interrupt me if you would like a question, because I'm not sure I can see the questions in the chat whilst I'm presenting.
Question tab open, so whenever people want to ask me questions, I'm just going to forward them to you.
Brilliant. Okay, so I can see my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes, I can.
Great. So I'm from UCL, the University College London, which is a pretty good university, I think. It's always ranked in the top 10 in the world of universities. And my kind of research area is in better biomaterials. So I want to make materials that can do more. And I'm interested in how they react in biological environments. So what happens when we put these materials in the body? And they can be large materials or they can be small materials like nanoparticles. And I'm interested in understanding why implants fail. So we have research looking at orthopedic implant failure and breast implant failure, so soft tissue and hard tissue failure. And I'm lucky because I'm in the division of surgery, which is Faculty of Medical Sciences, and we have lots of interactions with surgeons, which is useful. So we also want to make materials that are better, that do more, and we're interested in creating materials that can stimulate tissue regeneration. And this can be outside the body, in vitro, where we will isolate cells from the patient, put it on a material, a scaffold, and then culture it a bit more, and then we would hopefully have a tissue that we can place back into the person. This is kind of this outside the body approach is kind of the traditional way that people perform tissue engineering. And in fact, commercially hasn't been very successful. And the field is kind of moving more to this in vivo tissue engineering, where we forget about growing cells outside the body. We put materials into the body, and the material will release factors, change the behavior locally to encourage regeneration and new tissue formation where it is. So I'm particularly interested in bone tissue engineering. These are postdocs which are working with me looking at bone tissue engineering. Azzy is a postdoc who's particularly interested in looking at how bone forms in people who have diabetes. So diabetic people have more risk of fracture and delayed wound healing or bone healing, fracture repair. And she's created this model where we can look at bone formation in these diabetic models outside the body, and has found by adding certain factors we can induce normal bone repair in these patients. This is some of the bone that we've created. This is another student, Denise. This is exciting work because one of the problems about making tissues outside the body is that you can only make them a certain size. That's because of the oxygen and nutrient diffusion limits. Unless you've got blood vessels there to supply oxygen and nutrients, you can only have them about 200 micrometers. Oh, sorry. So what Denise has done, which is quite exciting, is made bigger bone by putting it inside hydrogels. And this is the first time anyone's been able to create these kind of bone-like structures inside in a 3D environment. So I mentioned about nanoparticles earlier. So we're interested in how nanoparticles interact with biological environments. So a nanoparticle is about 1 to 100 nanometers in length. And the idea is that it has a drug or an imaging component to it. You can functionalize it, add a label that binds to a particular target, and this could be a tumor cell receptor. You put those on your nanoparticle, and then hopefully when you put it in the body, it will go to that particular site. So Medina's research is interested in understanding actually why this doesn't happen. One of the reasons why we think this doesn't happen, why we don't get as much of our nanoparticles where we want to get them, is because we have this non-specific protein binding that covers our labels. And she's investigating just to see if this is the case. And also comparing our experimental models that are outside the lab, the in vitro models, to see how good they are compared with the in vivo models. So I have a research group. I also do a lot of teaching. So I'm a director of several courses at UCL. I'm interested in translation of medical science, and I started recently a new undergraduate course which is called Medical Innovation and Enterprise, which is where business and science to talk about how science is translated. But today I was going to talk to you about the importance of criticality in research. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of misinformation. Around COVID-19, there seems to be an increased amount of conspiracy theories than ever before. I think this might be just because it's a time of stress and people feel out of control and they can't control their lives. But we've seen about 5G causing the spread of COVID-19, that it was made artificially as a bioweapon. There's been lots of anti-vaccines, especially against Bill Gates. I'm not sure why Bill Gates is in charge of vaccines. But there's been lots of conspiracy, and it's sometimes difficult to know who to believe and which published research should we trust. But can we actually trust published research is the question. Well, I think the answer is no. Just because it's published, maybe even if it's published in a scientific paper, doesn't mean that we can trust it. Just to highlight this was a paper produced by Science several years ago now, and they made a complete spoof paper. There are clear and obvious errors in it, inappropriate methodologies, inappropriate analysis. and they submitted it to a number of different papers, journals, and it was only rejected by less than half of the journals. And they submitted these to not very high impacting journals. These were database open access journals. So they run on a slightly different kind of financial model than the Elsevier or other journals that you have to pay for to get access to. So the open access journals require the individual to pay a substantial amount of money, £2,000, to publish normally in those journals. But this spoof paper was only rejected by 98 of the journals, accepted by 157, and 16 papers were accepted by the editor despite there were damning peer reviews. So this is Ben Goldacre, and he's been a campaigner for a while that just because something's published doesn't mean that's necessarily very good. And we need to maintain a criticality the same as if we read a newspaper, as we should do if we're reading a research paper. So I'm going to talk to you about the motivation for publishing. So I think if we want to be critical about research, we need to think about why people publish in the first place. We're going to talk a little bit about what should be published, and then how do we find the most important papers. I was going to do a little exercise for the people there. I'm not sure how easy that will be to do, but we'll see. What makes a paper important, and then the importance of critically analysing research papers in terms of society. So why do we publish? Well, I think fundamentally the reason we should be publishing is to share our research findings and discoveries to improve society. And the other important thing why scientists need to publish is to get critical appraisal. Critical appraisal is important for scientists. Without critical appraisal, we don't develop. Nobody likes being criticised, especially scientists. If you spent 25 years working on something, and then someone says, "Well, actually, it's not very good," then it's not very helpful. But it is one of the main drivers for publishing, is to improve science and inspire scientists.
I really lost the gun.
And obviously, it's the way we improve science. Isaac Newton, one of our greatest scientists ever, didn't get everything completely correct. Einstein came along and showed us there was different answers. And I think what can happen, especially in small groups or small environments, even in countries levels, is that when you talk to yourself, your own group, everyone does a lot of clapping their backs and saying, "Yes, we're great. That's a brilliant answer." When you need to share this with a wider community, and across the world where people have different ideas as well. Well, the other thing why people publish, and this is the real reason really, is to get funding. So I need to publish to make myself known in this field, so that then when I ask funders for money, they will say, "Oh yes, he's an expert in this field." I do it to get promoted. You're not going to get promoted unless you have a number of publications. And in fact, in some universities now, there are metrics that they use for this promotion process, and even keeping your job sometimes, unless you meet those targets, you will not get your job. Several different countries, Japan for example, you have to publish at least 3 papers during your PhD, otherwise you won't be awarded your PhD.
During your PhD or prior to?
During your PhD.
Oh, okay.
Now, what that can generate is lots of rubbish papers.
Yeah.
So people feel the need to publish. Doesn't matter where they publish.
As long as they publish.
As long as they publish, and then it becomes meaningless. When even so in the UK, for surgeons to get a consultancy or to get a fellowship, they also have metrics that they use for measuring publications. And so all the surgeons that I work with who are trainees or starting off, they don't care about where you publish. They just want to to publish. For me, this can cause a bit of conflict, because for me, I don't want to publish anywhere. It doesn't matter to me the number of papers, it's the quality of the papers. And in fact, publishing a bad paper is damaging, or could be damaging to my career. Lots of countries have something similar to this. So in the UK, we have this research excellence framework where universities will get money from the government based on the status of each of their academics in terms of their publications. So each academic will be assessed, has to submit their best publications, and they will determine whether you're a grade 1 or a grade 5 scientist. And for each grade 1 scientist, the university gets more money than if you're a grade 5.
Okay.
There's also this balance, I think, when you're publishing about how much information that you should gather. Like we said earlier, there's always a level of uncertainty. You're not going to have the perfect paper. And to illustrate this, there's Charles Darwin, who was lucky enough to be supported by his wife. He was very rich, and he was able to gather over a lifetime lots and lots of data for the evolution biology, for the evolution theory. But what actually kind of spurred him to publish this research was Alfred Wallace, who wrote Charles Darwin a letter saying, "I've got this great idea about evolution," and Darwin went, "Oh, I've also got that idea, but I've been keeping it for this period of time," and that spurred them to publish a paper together and work together. But there's a balance. You haven't got Charles Darwin's time. Scientists do not have the time to wait 30 years for a single publication. So when you publish, and that's especially true when there's a pandemic or some other urgent need where we need rapid research publication and to share that. But as the need increase, there's also increased opportunism. So lots of people I know have ventured into COVID-19 research who haven't previously done any kind of virology or virus research, because there's lots of funding, and it means that your profile as a researcher or a company or a university is going to be raised because you're publishing on COVID-19 research. So what should we publish? Should we only publish positive results? Well, sadly, there is a positive results bias in the literature. People rarely publish negative results. That might be best illustrated by the clinical trials, where only 5.9% of industry-sponsored cancer trials are published, and of those 75% gave positive results. So that makes you think that the other 94% of clinical trials on cancer that were industry sponsors were not published and probably gave negative results. That means we're losing a lot of information, a lot of knowledge about that particular drug. Even in terms of not clinical trials, there's this citations that create an unfounded authority. And this was a good paper to illustrate this, where two papers were published at a similar time. One said that they had a negative result, and one said they had a positive result. The one that said they had a positive result got many more citations than the one that had a negative result. And this means that journals are less likely to be willing to publish negative research results because less people will cite those negative outcomes. But generally, when we publish something, we want to publish something that's interesting to the readership of that journal. Research that is fully traceable. So this is an increasing trend, which is a good trend, where the raw data is available on a database. That means other people can access that data and check the analysis at least. It doesn't check whether the raw data has been fraudulent, because you can still generate fraudulent data, but at least it enables you to check the analytical approach. Research which is repeatable. Research which has measurable outcomes, so statistical approaches are really important. Research that has full agreement of the authors. Now, that might sound obvious, but I've been involved in a few cases where students have published research with my name on, which I haven't even been aware of, and that could be damaging for me. I think students generally think they're doing me a favour, another publication, but they're not. Research that discusses flaws and uncertainty, and as Leyla was mentioning earlier, there is an increasing amount of sales that appears in published research, where people, journals, editors, and the authors might put a very positive kind of slant on their research. It used to be that you would paint a very positive picture in grants or applications, but you'd less likely to do that in the actual your publications. Fundamentally, what you want to publish is research that you're willing to have in public domain, because research, any publication, is immortal, really. You know, if I die tomorrow, then my published research will still live on. Yeah. And will be there for a long time. If you are associated with fraud or bad research, that can stick with you. Certainly for academic jobs, you may not be able to get employed again if you're associated with poor research. Research which is repeatable, that seems pretty obvious. You want to publish research that's repeatable. This was a paper published by in a psychology journal where they took the 100 most cited articles in that year in a well-known psychology journal, and they sent it out to different labs across the world to see if they could repeat those experiments. You might be expected that only 39% of those studies were found to be repeatable.
Oh, that's bad.
Now, you could argue that maybe this is psychology, so more prone to variability maybe, but yeah, a control study should be repeatable. Yeah. You should also want research that you want in the published domain, that's judged by your peers. And we've had increased numbers of retractions. Now, my feeling is that we don't have enough retractions still, but there's a particular website called Retraction Watch that's existed for a few years now, which just watches retractions, which is interesting. And it can make, then you can see if there's particular authors that have repeated retractions, if there's certain countries, fields of research that are more prone to retraction than other areas. This is actually now, I think there's around 35 retracted COVID-19 papers already, which is higher than most other field, or any other field currently. You're more likely to have a COVID-19 retracted paper. And I guess there's a balance here, like we said earlier, about the need for rapid research publications, but also appropriate scrutiny of those publications as well.
Do you, Professor, personally believe these research papers related to COVID, this current pandemic, these research papers are somewhat reliable because they're out there, they're published after such a short period of time? And how much do you think hard work and research and in-depth and thorough research has gone into it? And do you think that maybe in next year or by the end of this year, a lot of these will be retracted because new information and more reliable information will be out there?
So I think, you know, maybe I'm painting a very negative picture. Yeah, like generally speaking, like scientists want to publish research because they do good research. But that doesn't mean that all published research is good. And I think the COVID-19 is a particular problem where journals have shortened the peer review process so that they can have rapid turnaround of those publications. And the journals will do that because they want people to read their journals. They want to sell advertising. And if they have COVID-19 papers in there, that makes it more interesting to the public. It might get more media attention. But also maybe there's also pressure on academics or scientists that they want to share their information, and maybe they haven't had a chance to check the information as much as they would normally. They understand the pressures. They also understand the opportunity, which means maybe in a normal circumstance they might wait to get more data, but they think, okay, this is what I've got, I'm going to go for it. So if you lead a research group like I do, then you have MSc students, I've got PhD students, I've got postdocs. If any one of those people commits fraud and we publish a paper together, then I'm responsible. So you have to have an element of trust in the research environment that you're creating, to trust in your, because you can trust in your students to produce data. You can look at the data, see if it's reasonable, see if it's not reasonable, but it's very difficult to stop fraud completely. What you can do is encourage an environment for good academic practice, where this is where you say clearly these are the dangers of publishing incomplete studies or manipulating data, and also kind of encouraging publication, because obviously publications are important for students' careers and my career. But at the same time, if I'm telling my students, where's my publication, where's my publication, where's my publication all the time, then that puts a lot of pressure on the students to do something, and that's when maybe fraud can occur again. So I think it is about pressure. I think it is about opportunism by some, and I also think it's about the peer review process maybe not being as thorough as it could be during this period. I think it still means that, so the other argument for this is, why don't we just publish everything? Why bother having a peer review process? Because if we're saying the peer review process doesn't work very well, then if we put everything in the public domain, then we can get more valid criticism back. And certainly you think of, Isaac Newton, as you mentioned earlier, that's what used to happen. They'd publish everything, and then they'd get the critical comments after they published.
Yeah, that's not very useful.
But yeah, it's difficult because you want to have valid opinions on this as well. So am I capable of judging a journal on mathematics? No, I don't think I am capable of giving a valid opinion, and the same is like non-experts.
Yeah.
But this is happening, and it's called open journal resources. That's happening. I was going to say the other thing that we need to think about when we're publishing is about animal use and about human use. So in terms of animal use, we need to make sure that the study is valid and it's not a waste of animal life. I think that animal research is necessary, but I also think there's a lot of waste in animal research, and lots of experiments are performed unnecessary. They're not well planned out, probably don't have clear hypothesis testing. And we've been involved in the paper recently to try and encourage good practice in animal research in terms of the planning of the model that you're using. But there's also human use concerns. So people using humans as guinea pigs. Normally these are associated with compassionate cases where patients are going to die anyhow, unless they have some novel intervention. And you can make a case to have a compassionate intervention. But this is also can cause areas of fraud or poor academic approach. So this is Paolo Maccheroni, who you may have heard about. He was involved in a big scandal at the Karolinska Institute that involved several people getting fired, including Maccheroni, who actually had a criminal charge against him as well. And this was because both in terms of the approach he took in informing the patients about the novel treatment, and this was for a trachea replacement, and the allegations were that they didn't get proper consent from the patient and the patient's family for this approach, and didn't inform about the risks appropriately. But also in terms of the papers they published in the Lancet, they were retracted as well because the reports they had were false. They claimed there was an endothelium layer that was formed, and that was incorrect. So there are cases, and this is of large case fraud. This was a paper, I'll give you another example. This was in Nature, which is one of the best papers out there, has a very high impact factor. And a few years ago now, they published 2 papers associated with STAP cells. This was groundbreaking research and shocked the community in a way, because I remember reading this at the time, 2014, thinking, well, that's unbelievable, it will change everything. And it was about having cells that you can take from a patient, and just by putting them in different environmental conditions, you could make them embryonic stem cell-like. It means that they could have pluripotent environments without inserting genes via viruses or plasmids. Now, the reasons it found out eventually that they were embryonic stem cell-like was because they were embryonic stem cells, and the author had used results from her PhD as opposed to these other cells. Both papers were retracted. The senior author, this was in Japan, actually committed suicide about this publication. That's Japan, because it was such, and I have some good collaborators in Japan, and it's very hard for them to admit it. It's a national shame even now about this paper being published. We do have some great tools now to look at bad science. One of them is called PubPeer, and this is an online journal club, it's called, where you can write a peer review, normally a critical peer review, about a published paper. And the reason the STAP cell papers, these Nature papers, were caught out, was because of PubPeer. People said the images had been manipulated, they were copied, and showed evidence of this. One of the senior authors on this was Ficanti, Charles Ficanti, and if you type his name in PubPeer, you get a whole list of different papers which have been retracted. And it's quite a good way if you're thinking of joining a research group or want to have an invited speaker, then type their name in PubPeer to see what comes up. There is a balance. I type my own name in there occasionally to see if anything comes up. Nothing so far, but I think partly that's because of the level of fame you have. So if you're a very well-known scientist, obviously you're going to have more scrutiny by people as well. But the things that they will spot is things like this, where they've said that these are different images when they're the same image. Western blots, again, they've said that these are different images when they're the same image. And there's loads of different examples about this of image manipulation or not. So I guess the question is why this wasn't caught at peer review, and why it takes post-publication peer review to find this out. And this might be a mistake, or it might be deliberate manipulation. This looks like deliberate manipulation. So why do poor papers get published? And like the normal process of publishing a paper would be you write your paper, you submit it to the journal, you get an editor's judgment. Then if you get through the editor's judgment, then it'll go for peer review. You always get some comments on peer review. You'll answer those comments, and then you publish. I've never published a paper that hasn't had some peer review comments which you want to change. If I didn't get any peer review comments, then I would be worried that this hasn't been properly scrutinised. This is the same for students when they submit their theses or if they don't get any comments from their supervisor, it probably means they haven't read it properly. Then you publish. So lots of people think the peer review system doesn't work very well. This is Dr. Richard Smith, who was former editor of the British Medical Journal. He said the peer review is a flawed process full of easily identifiable defects with little evidence that it works. And as we said earlier, there was this paper to prove that. And the level of scrutiny does vary depending on the paper you're putting it through. And also, the level of editor input also varies. For Nature, some of the high impact journals, the editor's judgment is sometimes more challenging than the peer review process. So there's a number of reasons why. It could be poor peer review, it could be biased, it could be genuine mistakes, there could be fraud, and it could be fake reviewers. Fake reviewers, this means that people creating false accounts so they can review their own work, is one of the highest causes of rejections. And then fraud, where people have demonstrated that there's clear fraud in the publication. I should say, before that, sorry, of the biggest the biggest reason why papers are retracted, though, is because the authors themselves have spotted an error after they've been published. But after that, then it's fake reviews and fraud. And one of the reasons about the peer review process is that the peer reviewers don't get paid, I think, and they don't get acknowledgement for their contribution. Now, that was until recently, whereas Publons have just started, which has started to publish the reviewer comments alongside the actual published paper. So if you register with Publons, then when you review a research paper, you can tell Publons, then when anybody searches for that paper, you can see the peer review comments next to it, which is very useful.
So when you see something wrong with the article, you can write it.
So this is actually during the publication process. So when you're reviewing, when an academic or some scientist is reviewing a publication, they might have several different comments, which either the author will address or they won't address, but they will be next to the article. And sometimes the peer review comments are more interesting than the actual paper.
Really.
The other reason we've discussed earlier is there is increasing amount of publications. There's an increasing amount of journals, an increasing amount of publications that are out there. That means that journals and papers need to attract readers. To do that, they need more publications. Each academic is increasingly publishing more papers per year because there's increased pressure on them as well. But ultimately, there is an increased pressure to publish, and there's more journals, so that means increased need to attract customers. We did discuss.
Sorry for disrupting. For example, now this pandemic, COVID-19 is still trending, we can say. And for example, there's a research about a certain type of cancer, and what is this? For example, this. Let me rephrase my question. The author of the research paper, what is the probability of the person or the peer person to kind of delay that to give more room to review the COVID articles? So
yeah, I think this is. I think there's two interesting questions here. One of them I've just written a proposal for, actually, for a little study, which is what is the impact of COVID-19 research on other research in similar fields? So you'd think that at time of need, resources are rightly focused on COVID-19. That's the immediate need, killing lots of people, damaging people's lives. Therefore, it's right that we focus on that research. But what is the impact on other research? Does that mean that there's less publications of other research? Does it mean there's less money going to other research areas? So that's an interesting area, and possibly it will shape in terms of future research funding and research priorities. I mean, governments are certainly going to be interested in virology research, you'd think, in the next 10 years. If there's any person thinking about doing a PhD, you might want to do some area in virology. But then, the other point is you were saying about within a journal itself, how does it affect the peer review process? So every editor will tell you one of the biggest problems of being an editor is finding people to peer review in a quick manner.
Exactly.
And if you overburden people, if you don't have the experts in the right field, then maybe you start asking your second choice or your third choice to peer review that publication. You may not be getting the experts reviewing. when I don't peer review. It's, you know, like all academics, you've only got a certain amount of time. I will peer review in papers that I want to publish because I want to be nice to the editors. So I won't publish in lower impact journal. I won't peer review for lower impact journals. And I think that's the same with most people, which also creates this imbalance as well, where maybe the better well-known scientists are only peer reviewing in the high impact journals and being more thorough there, whilst maybe the less experienced are reviewing in the lower impact journals.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah. So there's lots of bias as well. This is actually a grant review process that was highlighting this in the UK, where if this is some time ago, but when there was a difference between women and men in their competence scores when they were rated the same on paper when they went for interview. But there's also other peer review bias, prestige of the actual author. So if you have a high impact yourself as a researcher, so if you're well known in that field, then you're more likely to be cited. So therefore a journal is more likely to publish your research because you're well known. If it's an institution, if it's English, more people speak English. It means that more people are likely to read it if it's got positive results, we mentioned. This is a study that was done a long time ago now, but they resubmitted 12 articles and they just changed the title and the author's name, and importantly, they changed the institution. Yeah. So they changed it from a well-known prestigious university to a less prestigious or fictitious university. And they found that of those resubmitted, which were just the same, only 3 were recognised as resubmissions out of the 12. 8 were rejected, all because of poor study design, inadequate statistical analysis, or poor quality, when they're exactly the same paper that have already been accepted from the more prestigious institutions. There's other studies that have shown, like in terms of actually, I said to you earlier, more experienced reviewers are better. This paper says the opposite, that if you're under the age of 40, if you're a good institution and you're known to the editors, and importantly, if you've had good methodological training, then you make a good reviewer. Okay, I was going to do this activity. I'm not sure it's going to work because I can't see people. You can tell me, Leyla, whether you think it's going to work. So I was going to ask you to find the best 5 papers using any method you want on nanoparticles and cancer. Why don't you do that, even if you don't do it? But maybe we need a little break for a few minutes anyhow. And if I give you, what, 5 minutes to find the best papers, and then we'll discuss how you found them.
Okay.
And why you think they're important.
Most important, I think I'll first just Google it. And because I'm guessing lots of people who are not in this field and would do the same, and I'm just going to try and Google this. Okay. Therapy.
Are you using Google or Google Scholar?
Yes. I'm just really slow. Let me see.
You done? Have you found your best papers?
There's several that comes across, and I've come across, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to put them in order.
Okay.
What I do mostly, especially because my field is law, and when I'm looking for articles or papers, I go with the most cited, and I go with, of course, after reading the abstract and the content, I go with how balanced is it? Is it just talking about, for example, if it's discussing a case, or if it's referring, if it's talking about a certain legal issue, and how many cases it refers to, and what is which contradicting cases it refers to, and how does it justify the results. And with this one, I'm just going to go with the most cited.
You can't. Good. I think that's what most people do, really. I guess the first thing is, like, in terms of how you search, what database you do, and this often depends on the institution you're with. In terms of what access you have. I always use the Web of Science. That's because I'm kind of in the physical and biological science. PubMed is also available, which is biologically based, so biomedical. Most people, even in the UCL where they have access to Web of Science, most of my students still use Google Scholar. There is a difference between these. And that's, so Google Scholar is, it's not curated. PubMed and Web of Science, they have human intervention, whilst Google is just a known algorithm. And you can see there are variations between the keywords it picks up and the specificity. So some of my papers, this one's been cited 198 times in Google Scholar, whilst it's 136 in Web of Science. There's some papers that are missing from Google Scholar, which are present in Web of Science.
What makes that the difference? Is it that because there's human intervention that takes out all these glitches in the algorithm, for example, or did they detect that it's a fake account or fake citation?
In terms of the numbers of citations, so the Web of Science and PubMed will only have certain journals that are of certain standard, whilst Google Scholar will just take any published paper. There's no kind of distinction between this is a valid scientific research or not a valid scientific research paper or journal. And then in terms of the keywords and curation that happens, yeah, I think it does vary in terms of which journals are included, which aren't, and how it catches, how the algorithm catches the right keywords. Yeah. And so this is different. Like, so if you type in, is one of the things I was going to say about is Boolean logic. So if you put, if I'm looking for myself, I've got an unusual name. I'm the only, well, I was the only GGL that was publishing. Now there's another GGL that started publishing in something that's fairly similar to what I'm doing, well, corneal implants, which is the first time I've ever had to say that this is not my publication. But if you're have a more common name, that there's lots of people available, then you're going to get obviously a lot less specific. But Boolean logic means that you can use and or on. You can use quote marks surrounding the word so it groups them together. And this idea of sensitivity and specificity is important. You can search according to title, like Google Scholar, or you could search according to keywords or something that's in the abstract. And how you search is actually quite important if you're doing a systematic review or you're looking for literature, because the process of that search, you should be mentioning in your methodology why are you picking these papers, and it should be traceable. So, Leyla, you picked because of the number of citations. Why do some papers get cited more than others? I think everyone does what you do. But why do some papers get cited more than others?
Impact, because as we mentioned earlier, maybe the certain topics might be trending at the time. There's a need for writing papers on that. There people in universities doing dissertations on that, and it could be that, and for other reasons.
I think that's right. So if it's a sexy topic, you know, like if it's COVID-19, then it's going to get more citations than soil science. And I don't know anyone who's interested in soil science. I'm sure there are, but you know, if it's interesting, if it's multidisciplinary. So if more people than just that small field are interested in it, then that could be a reason why it gets cited more. Access. So like we said, like not everyone will have access to the journals.
So the ones that are paid and that you have to have an access to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought you were going to say as well, Leyla, that the journal impact factor as well. So if it's a well-known journal like Nature, then people are more likely to cite it or more likely to read it because they have a bigger presence. And they're trusted more, I think. Is there anything else?
The author, the popularity of the author, and they will think, oh, this is the person that's published it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the how famous the author is,
and which institution they're from.
Yeah, in law, it's, you know, if there's a prominent judge that people know about and they write an article, then that might have more weight than someone else. I think the number one reason why citations get more citations is a snowball effect, because everyone does like you do, because everyone else has cited it, they cite it. And then it just gains more and more publications or more citations because it has more citations. And this is like kind of a known conformity kind of thing where people do what everyone else is doing. I don't know, I'm not going to show this video, but there's a...
This is one of my favorite experiments.
Is it Solomon Asch experiment? It's very good. Shall I play it? I don't know if I can play it.
Yeah, it's fine. It plays. I've done quite a bit of reading on this when I was doing my psychology.
It's not playing, so I'll leave it. But the idea is that he did a couple of interesting experiments. This one, it's people in an elevator where everybody faces the wall and they're all actors. And then when the customer, the non-actor comes in, eventually they all conform to what everyone else in the lift is doing and faces the wall. He did another experiment looking at with actors again, where he would ask them a series of questions, and they'll start off and everyone will get them correct, and they're really simple questions. And then the actors would be deliberately getting them wrong, and the real person, the participant, would then start conforming to what the other people were doing, even though they knew they were getting it wrong. And this happens in science. And the number of citations, you do things because everyone else does them. It's scientific confirmation. But like you said, author's important, the journal's important, if it's open access, if it's multidisciplinary, if it's English, if it's age, obviously this is an obvious one. The older the article, the more citations it accrues. So actually, what we don't want is the total number of citations. Probably a better indicator would be the number of citations per year.
Yeah.
And lastly, is it a good article?
Yeah.
Is it important? Is it a wide-ranging study? Is the number of participants large? Or, and this is the other reason why some people get cited more than others, it's a good example of bad science. Like we said, Andrew Wakefield's NMR vaccine is cited hugely, and it's still being cited even though it's retracted. But that's not a good example of bad science. So impact factors. So the impact factor, I've talked about it, but haven't explained it properly. So the impact factor of a journal is the average number of citations each article in that journal has over the previous 2 years. So Nature is very high, and then anything above 4 anything above 2 is a reasonable journal. There's loads of journals that are 0 to 1, which possibly I would be questioning whether they are just whether they do have scientific rigor. So this image shows that even with Nature, the reason they have a high average is because there's a few papers that are massively cited, as opposed to the medium, which is more in common with lots of other papers. So I have one paper that has 4,000 citations, whilst the others are lower. So the medium average value might be more important. And if you are aware of this in terms of getting citations, and as an academic, the number of citations are important. They affect my metrics of how good a scientist I am. People will look at the amount of times my papers have been cited. We know that I could ask my colleagues who are maybe better known than I am if they want to be added to the paper. That's what people do. They say, oh, I'm going to ask my very famous friend if they'd like to co-author this paper. I can talk to the editor, take them out, make sure that we have a good relationship so that we avoid having that first hurdle. Yeah. And there is this kind of like hierarchy of evidence that you have that we should be looking at. So at the top here, and I'm not sure this is entirely true, it's kind of often quoted, is that we have systematic reviews and meta-analysis. This is analysis of published research. So if you're looking at lots of different clinical trials all together and seeing the commonality between them. And then right at the bottom, you have expert opinion. Expert opinion is not high quality evidence, it's just someone's opinion. Case series, case reports, again, not a controlled environment, not a controlled experiment. The other thing, I suppose, what makes a paper important is, is it recommended to you? If somebody tells you that it's good, then, your lecturer or colleague, then that's useful. And also, we haven't talked about really is whether it's a primary data or review. And this depends on whether or how you're going to use the information. Is it being used just for information about this topic to get a broader understanding of what the topic is? Then that's what a review is. But a review, a narrative review where your experts are providing an opinion, is not really evidence. It's just opinion. But it could be still useful. So if there's anything else, what makes a paper important is the content. And you have to make your own evaluation of the paper. And if you don't understand the content of the paper, then sure, you can ask opinions of other people. But it's quite a good idea, certainly I tell my students, is that if you don't understand what the methodology of that, then look at the methodology. Like find out about the methodology. And obviously that's not easy for the general public to do. But there are some simple things about quantitative comparisons to something. So is it better than if it's like my area of medical device or nanoparticle, is it better than a current treatment? Do they compare? Are the controls appropriate for it? Yes, don't be a scientific sheep. So, like I said earlier, you can't believe everything you read. This is Brexit. We're supposed to have an extra 350 million per week in our budget now since Brexit. That's never going to happen. But there's lots of, we don't believe, in the UK we have very active and press that make lots of stories that are politically motivated. And we know we don't believe them. Well, I think most sensible people don't believe it. But we have to view scientific journals in just the same way. Both journals and newspapers are commercial enterprises. They're there to make money, to sell advertising. So we should take the same critical approach to both.
Exactly.
Have I got time? I was going to mention something else, but I don't have to. Maybe it's better to have a little chat. Maybe we just talk about why is critical approach to analysing research papers important? Well, I think it's important because, like we said earlier, it's about hope and hype. We want to make sure the money the funding goes to good research. We want to give money and funding to research that is likely to benefit patients and not spurious. It's got to be well-controlled studies. I think, my message here is that we need to be critical about research, because otherwise research isn't being funded appropriately, and also we're going to lose public trust in research. Questions?
For now, I think we don't have questions, like the one that I don't see any here. I think people enjoyed a lot, this conversation we had today, and I myself personally enjoyed it so much. I want to write an article. I want to start writing articles, but mostly on IP, intellectual property. But this area, it coincides so much with your field, because lots of things that you do, the scientists do in your field, and in order to benefit from this in the future, they have to patent it and they have to get certain approvals. And it might be actually interesting to me. And it's quite an interesting area, actually.
Yeah, I think I am interested in the patent process as well. I think now, increasingly, it seems to be that the need for patents is increasing for funding. But in terms of the actual need for the value of patent, this is a different discussion. But a lot of patents in my field are so easily to get around that actually the value of the patent, I'm not sure what it is. And actually being the first person to do it is probably more important than having the patent.
Yeah. And that's what I think. You change one molecule, or you change something a little bit, a tiny detail, and you can actually say, oh, this is my way of doing it. This is what I did. It could be based on that, or it could be loosely related to that, but it's mine anyways. And this is what I think that's the tricky part when we're talking about nanoparticles, right?
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting area. Also, Professor, I have this interesting question, especially I think it's related to Medina's paper. I think it was delivery of the medicine through nanoparticles. And 2 years ago, when I think it was in 2019, when you came to Azerbaijan and you gave we did a similar seminar. And you were talking about delivering medicine, or helping people with their implants. How much, for example, when I'm reading articles, or when I'm reading papers about this and delivery of the medicine, because after that seminar, I started doing research, and for example, I know that medicines, a lot of that gets filtered with our liver, right? Some of that gets away, and we don't know how much of that gets actually, becomes our cure. And for example, pain relieving medicines, and how much nanoparticles, how much of this can help with delivering the pain. For example, if I'm taking a painkiller, it helps me within 30 minutes or 60 minutes. And how much do you think that can happen? I'm taking one pill and I'm just feeling fine after that.
So I think it's an interesting thing is that a lot of the drug discovery that we've gone through in terms of the drugs we use in the supermarkets were more serendipity found out, in terms of there wasn't a design-led process normally. So they found out that this drug works better than this drug. Chemotherapy now, in terms of which combination of chemotherapy works for which cancer, it's normally based on just experience and clinical trials, as opposed to a knowledgeable kind of design-led approach. We go, oh, we'll use this drug because it affects this cells, or we know that this is more specific against this cancer. It's just, this works, so we should use that. And this is better than this. And this is, like in actual fact, like evidence in medicine is a new thing. Like using like an evidence-based approach. Surgery is still catching up in terms of using evidence-based methodologies to determine practice. And like, so that's one side of it, is that like we are getting better. We are getting better at using evidence to make decisions about patient treatment and which drugs are better. But we also need a design-led approach. But then I think the other point you were making in terms of like the nanoparticles is it better than what's currently available? And this is like the key question, is that yes, we know that, I said earlier, like if 100 nanoparticles were injected, only 0.7 would get to the target if it was a tumour. Now, maybe if normally only 0.1% of your drug has got to the tumour, that's a 7-fold increase. So maybe that's a good thing, like that's.
Maybe I'm wrong, but chemotherapy attacks all the cells, right? And how much can you make sure that it just attacks the harmful one, the tumor itself?
So this is actually right. So this is, like, yeah, I'm saying that the targeting efficacy of our nanoparticles is actually quite low. So we can label them with anti-tumor markers, but the chance of them getting to the tumor is still fairly low currently. Hopefully it'll be improved.
Okay.
But it's still probably better than what we're currently using with the chemotherapy. The problem about nanoparticles, you say, okay, well, if 0.7% is going to the tumor cell, then that means 99.7% or 99% are going elsewhere in the body, and we need to find out where they're going and what damage they're doing in the area. But I think the central kind of tenet of medicine is it an improvement of the current treatment? There might be toxicity. Every drug has toxicity associated with it. It's just whether this is better than our current practice.
Yeah, like what weighs more? Does it do good more than bad?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's the same with in your field too. What you do as well, as long as it has more good than bad.
Yeah.
That's the side of it. Thank you so much, Professor, for today. Thank you for taking your time. And this is all recorded, and we'll publish it. So even if people watch it afterwards and have questions, you can either see it in the comment section, or we can forward it to you. And once we get response of people, then we can actually start discussing about online classes as well, if it fits for you, if you'd be willing to do that, because I believe this is such an under-recognized area, especially in my country, for example. There's a real hunger for this, and I would love to sit down and talk about it for hours and hours. And this is such an understudied and under-recognized, under-acknowledged area of science, and we're inevitably going towards that. We're inevitably going towards the nanoparticles. This huge drug industry is not doing well anymore. And we've seen, especially after this pandemic, I think it is inevitably going towards that. So
I say that we'd say, I think it's, if we want to have increased translation of medicine, and if you want increased trust in medicine and science, then I think this is important, in terms of how we publish and how we build trust.
Exactly, and research papers, this critical approach, I think it's not just towards the research papers, but also everything we read, basically. And I personally still believe in whatever it is, it comes down to teachers and education system, and how we encourage people, the young people, to approach critically to everything.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. Like, how do we make any decision? Like, who do we vote for? Who do we support in this election? We should use an evidence-based approach to make those decisions.
Importantly, of course, in medicine, because it all comes down to our health, and it's of utmost importance. And I'm so happy we had this conversation today, and I'm so happy to share with people. Thank you so much for your time, Professor.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.